Hey class! So imagine being the first ever softball team to exist. You'd be nervous, but so excited to show the crowd what you have to offer. Your first game, your first hit, your first catch. So many firsts at once. Wouldn't that be so crazy to imagine? Now think of this. No. We in society consider baseball to be primarily for males and softball to be primarily for girls. Well, actually, the first softball team to ever exist was in 1887, and it was actually deemed as a male sport. And it wasn't until 8 years later that it was finally deemed to be primarily for female athletes. With all this being said, this brings me to my topic of my speech. My speech is going to be discussing and looking at the history of softball itself. So, through my speech, it'll give us a better understanding of the history of female sports, which many may be interested to learn about today. I know I am because, as you can see, I actually play softball, so this topic really relates to me, and I hope it can relate to you guys too. So in 1895, the first ever team was created. This shows the development of sports and female sports in general. According to Barbara Sorensen in the History of Women's Softball article, July 8th, 2011, there was little interest in the game from spectators. This attitude quickly changed in 1904 when Spalding's Indoor Baseball Guide featured an entire section of women's softball. So the purpose of my speech overall is to inform my audience of the history of softball and the impact it has had for women. So to give you guys a little rundown of my speech, I will be talking about the history of softball, how it was developed today, and then through the end, positive and negative impacts that the creation of the first ever team had on women in society. So in 1887, a group of 20 young men had gathered in the Farragut Boat Club gym in order to hear the Harvard-Yale football game. After Yale's victory, a man picked up a stray boxing glove and threw it at someone, who hit it with a pole. George Hancock, considered to be the inventor of softball, tied the boxing glove so that it resembled a ball, chalked out a diamond on the floor, which gave it smaller dimensions than a regular baseball field to be able to fit in the gym, and broke off a broom handle to serve as a bat. Thus, a new version of baseball was born, which was softball. And this was found on the history of softball. So it's crazy to imagine that this ball was actually created first with a boxing glove, and then finally developed into this. So as previously acknowledged, the first ever team was created for men. It wasn't until 8 years later that softball was seen as a sport for females. The first women's team was formed at Chicago's West Division High School. So it was created by George Hancock. Softball's first ever name was actually Kitten League Ball, but in 1900s it was shortened to Kitten Ball. This was found in an article called USA History. So efforts to organize softball on a national basis didn't materialize until 1933, when Leo Fisher and Michael J. Polly, a Chicago sporting goods salesman, conceived the idea of organizing thousands of local softball teams in America into cohesive state organizations and state organizations into national organizations. So softball actually was a huge process back in history. It wasn't just like, oh, we're playing right now. It was like a huge development. So the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League was founded by Philip K. Wrigley. It was in existence from 1943 until 1954, and was started to keep the public eye on baseball after the majority of men were overseas fighting in World War II. The game started out as a cross between softball and baseball, but over the league's existence, the rules were actually modified more so towards baseball. This league was ended in 1954 as the owners did not want to take fans away from Major League Baseball. So baseball was a huge priority back then, and they didn't want to take the eye off that with softball. So internationally, the game is much bigger. In 1991, the International Olympic Committee decided to include softball in the Olympics. So softball was an Olympic sport at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta. The U.S. team campaigned hard to be one of the 8 teams included in the Olympics. The ASA established a national coaching pool and a national team selection committee. The selection committee was to field the best team that was represented the USA in all international events up until the 1996 Olympics. So eventually, all this actually led to softball being not included in the Olympics because it wasn't as popularized baseball or, gymnastics and all those other things. It just wasn't seen in the public eye. So this being said, let's see how softball is today. Softball today has developed tremendously, but there's still a ways to go. High schools and colleges as well are well known for having softball programs, but a major league is yet to come for us. Many find a stronger interest in baseball since it seems to be more popular to the eyes of society. Many women today participate and can become part of a college who is televised, such as 4 years. And Solano, we get posts on YouTube and stuff, so that's pretty cool. This is a great outcome compared to how softball used to be, and it has been consistent throughout the years when it comes to dynamics and popularity, unlike the past. Softball has come so far and has so much potential to grow even bigger. Now I want to deep dipper into both the positives and negative impacts softball had on women. So it was hard for women to be taken seriously, which was a major downfall of softball and why it was not as popular. Found on reconciling femininity and athleticism, women's increasing participation in sports intensified the pre-existing fears that strong active women were destroying masculine privilege and sobriety. In the 19th century, gender boundaries determined which activities were appropriate for women and men. On the other side, women were able to prove themselves and show the athleticism through a sport they thoroughly enjoyed, which is fair since baseball and other sports get to do that. So, softball allowed these women to show their athleticism, as stated. While most members of society viewed men's games as serious sports, they saw women's games as insignificant social events. White middle-class women with the luxury of leisure time were able to enjoy sports because their athletics seemed social rather than competitive. Softball allowed for women to show off their talents, but in the end, they would struggle to be taken seriously. So, in conclusion, in the first few minutes of my speech, I addressed the history of softball, the present day, and then the positive and negative effects softball had on women's society. So my thesis being softball has an interesting history and has grown so much today. So the final impact that softball has is it has come so far from what it was. It really does show that things have changed in society and that we should never give up on our dreams and what we are capable of, because it starts to become a little more difficult when you have the societal pressure. The growth of softball has come so far, and you can too. If you give up, you'll never reach what you could have.